telling you to take cover
right now.
We do have a tornado on the ground.
This is a tornado. Yeah, this is a very dangerous situation.
Tonight, we reflect on the events of May 22nd, 2011.
All these schools were in a line, basically, you know. Unfortunately, nobody thought about that. I think it was close to 4,000 or a little over 4,000 of our students had lost their school.
Schools destroyed, loved ones lost.
When he passed, they put his name up on the wall that for students and teachers that had passed.
A hospital destroyed by the tornado, and a hospital that was a beacon in the night.
I remember being up on the tower and looking out over the entire city of Joplin, and it was completely black. But yet, here Freeman was lit.
And now, a special presentation. Stronger Together, reflecting on May 22nd, 2011. And here are your hosts, Andy Searcy, Jessica Shear, and Mike Olmstead.
Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us as we reflect back on the Joplin tornado and the events that happened 10 years ago today.
We all remember where we were the night that the tragic storm hit the area. I myself was on my way back from Kansas City, where I had been that weekend, and the tornado actually touched down very close to my home. And of course, I was worried about my home. I was worried about my dog and very worried about my coworkers as well.
Guys, I had just lived in the area for about 7 weeks at the time. I was actually back home in Indiana getting the rest of my stuff before I moved back here permanently. I received a text message that Sunday evening from my son saying a tornado had hit Home Depot. I was obviously concerned, but had no idea the scope of what had just happened.
Now, each of us has a story, and that's what this show is all about. We'll begin tonight in our very own newsroom close to home with what was happening there. Now, we do want to warn our viewers that some of the stories you see tonight can be difficult. So please prepare yourself for what could cause some emotional triggers. Take cover now. Those are the 3 words that rang out across the city of Joplin 10 years ago that night. Deja Brown has the story.
Take shelter now. It looks like this is a pretty powerful tornado.
I'll never forget that night. When I see the video, there's this sinking feeling.
I am telling you to take cover right now. We do have a tornado on the ground.
This is a tornado. Yeah, this is a very dangerous situation. My God, that's how close I came. We cannot stress this enough. If you were in Joplin, please take cover. I didn't realize it was a tornado. I've seen plenty of videos of tornado, you know, having gone to school, having worked in the business for as long as I had seen videos of tornadoes, but it was one of those moments where things were out of context. You know, it's easy to go back now and look and say, yes, that's a tornado that was on the ground, but at the moment, I think it caught us all by surprise. There was that what in the world is this that we're looking at thing where, you know, you don't expect the tower cam to just come up and there's the tornado. No, it is certainly going off. And we transitioned into that, okay, now we get everybody to take it seriously. We get people to take cover, to take shelter. I think we all kind of defaulted to, it is our job to save as many people as we can. I wanted to make sure that I was there doing that for whoever needed it done for them at the moment.
And at that moment, someone he knew well needed it. KSN producer, Marion Kelly.
And Caitlin and Jeremiah were saying, take cover now.
Right now.
Kelly says it was the urgency in their voices that made her get into that crawl space.
I could feel the air being sucked out of that crawl space. And I thought, this is how I'm going to die. And I was, frankly, a little surprised when it got over with and I was still alive.
Do you credit people like Jeremiah and those people that you watched
Absolutely.
on that TV
In fact,
your life?
I told Jeremiah and I told Caitlin that I said, you all saved my life. I would not have taken cover if you hadn't used those exact words.
Personally, I think we did our jobs. I think we did what we were put here to do.
But the effects of that day, May 22nd, 2011, still linger for the both of them.
I can't look at it because it's never not fresh.
You know, my wife gets on to me. Because every year around the tornado, we talk about it. And she'll tell me, you did everything you could, you did everything you could. And I'll tell her I can come up with 160 reasons we didn't. When I was still predicting the weather, I felt like I had to put a little more effort into every forecast. I had to try harder to be more on point with it because of that.
As the sirens rang out that fateful night, KODE's Bubba Evansko was on air at a local radio station. Now, the events that followed that night have stuck with him throughout the last 10 years. He shares his story with us tonight.
Well, good Thursday morning to you. Hey, it's Bubba, everybody. Can you believe it?
It's the voice so many of us in the four-state area know all too well.
Hey, we'll have a little fun this morning. Why not?
His bubbly, infectious personality streams across our radio airwaves. You can't help but smile.
I've had a good time having some fun.
But a decade ago, the storm that changed so many lives changed his too.
It's been 10 years, and I can hear every sound. I can smell every smell. I remember everything about it, like it happened yesterday.
Bubba Evansko was on air the moment storms started brewing to the west of Joplin.
I did notice there was some activity in Kansas, so I said it may be heading this way. Just keep your ear on the radio. We'll keep you up to date as we go.
When a call into the radio station from the Jasper County and Joplin emergency manager dropped, uneasiness set in.
We didn't know exactly what was going on. We're trying to follow local TV. We're taking phone call reports as much as possible, looking out the window like I think, unfortunately, a lot of people were doing to see what was happening.
Bubba was supposed to be off work just 20 minutes after the tornado hit the city of Joplin. He, of course, stayed hours later.
At that point, we shifted from telling people there was a warning to let's break it down. We're going to go ahead and go on all stations at once. We're going to simulcast everywhere. And then it went to just taking damage reports as quick as we could from everyone.
A co-worker who headed home to check on his belongings phoned in too.
He called on his way home to let us know his apartment building was gone. That's when we realized that it was going to be something that we'd never seen before.
Bubba continued working nearly non-stop, worried for his own family's safety.
I was worried about them. I'm worried about my community. But I have a responsibility to continue to tell people what's going on. So you can't leave. You can't walk away.
Even 10 years later, the images he saw as he made his way back to the comfort of his home in Webb City haunt him.
It's human nature to wonder if I would have sounded the alarm a little earlier, if there would have been any more lives saved.
Now he relates the seriousness of severe thunderstorm and tornado warnings to his listeners more than ever before.
As much as I feel guilty, as much as I wonder if I could have done more, I also thank God every day that he blessed me with the opportunity to serve my community when they needed me the most.
We all know the saying, it takes a village, but after the tornado, it took a lot more than just a village. It took thousands of volunteers.
It certainly did, Mike, and it also took extraordinary leadership in the area as well, not only to get the volunteers going, but to get the needs of the residents met as well, and it even took some elephants as well, I hear.
Yeah, and remember the Extreme Home Makeover Project? We'll check in with that project and see how one of the deserving homeowners is doing today, 10 years later. Stay with us.
When the tornado swept through Joplin 10 years ago, the focus at City Hall changed in an instant. The focus was search and recovery, and some of those programs continue today. Gretchen Bolander takes us back to that night and what happened next.
I heard glass breaking out of the windows around us, and then we started getting telephone calls.
Joplin City Council member Gary Shaw quickly learned his city had sustained serious tornado damage. It wasn't long before he got a first-hand view of just how bad it was during a ride along the path of destruction with a Joplin police officer.
I thought I was in another world. I mean, I thought I was someplace else. It certainly wasn't Joplin, and none of those landmarks that we knew.
He knew there was a lot of work to be done, both for city leaders and city workers, emergency responders combing through the destruction for survivors and victims. A massive cleanup to get rid of nearly 3 million cubic yards of debris.
It really was a miracle to watch the streets being cleared and the properties being cleared. Yeah, there were some challenges.
One of the issues was how to let tornado survivors know what was happening.
Obviously, people did not have a TV. They didn't have a house in some cases. They may not have a car to listen to a radio. So we needed to find ways to reach out to people.
An emergency operations center was the headquarters for all the decision making. They had staged mock disasters in the past, so they had a game plan in place. But the sheer magnitude of the destruction caused unforeseen complications.
We didn't have enough phone lines. We didn't have enough computers. Of course, our IT department kicked into gear.
And it wasn't always what to do, but sometimes what not to do, like a circus volunteering elephants for the cleanup.
My news release said, circus animals are not condoned to do debris removal. Even though they're offered and we appreciate everybody's help, just was not a good idea.
Finding shelter for homeless survivors was crucial, both in the short term and more permanent sites. City workers coordinated with FEMA to install 586 temporary housing units just weeks after the storm.
We set up the center out by the airport.
New construction also went under the microscope, with the city looking for strategies to reinforce future homes and businesses. One new requirement focused on hurricane clips, a way to keep the roof on a structure in high winds, protecting anyone sheltering inside.
Hopefully, we never have to face that again, but we're in better position now if we had to.
There were also much bigger decisions to make, with $158 million in federal disaster grants, leading to a new library, Joplin Senior Center, 20th Street overpass, and significant infrastructure upgrades.
Our pipes are all worn out. A lot of our streets and things were worn out. So we end up with a third of our city being rebuilt from money that we wouldn't have had ourselves.
Now, 10 years later, Gary Shaw still mourns the 161 lives lost to the storm. But he adds Joplin isn't defined by the past.
We have a great city. And, I made a statement several times lately that I believe Joplin's greatest days are ahead of us.
Reporting in Joplin, I'm Gretchen Bolander.
In just a matter of minutes, the tornado left thousands without a home in Joplin. But the work to begin rebuilding those homes and finding new homes for people began the very next day.
You're just sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, 3% of your town's destroyed. What are you going to do? How are you going to recover? But that next morning, we had a contractor in here rebuilding a hair salon. Just that one permit, helped with the attitude that maybe we can get through this.
According to U.S. Census estimates, Joplin's population dropped overnight from over 50,000 to around 48,000. Troy Bolander, the Director of Planning, Development, and Neighborhood Services for the City of Joplin, says the road to rebuilding was at first a frightening thought. But like always, the community came through.
I think we started feeling more confidence when we started seeing the rebuilding. It was a holistic effort. You see even some major employers keep the employees on the payroll. Nonprofits such as Economic Security Corporation, Joplin Habitat for Humanity, and Joplin Housing Authority all contributed to make sure we can find housing for these displaced citizens.
Most of the displaced citizens found new housing within a 30-mile radius of Joplin.
We saw some neighborhoods that were high rentals, such as 70%. That was challenging for them to get housing stock back up. What we try to do is create a housing program to incentivize buyers to buy a home in the disaster recovery area, which also encourage builders to build on those lots as well.
In August of 2013, with funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development through Community Development Block Grants, the city created the Joplin Homeowners Assistance Program, or JHAP.
JHAP allowed borrowers to move into the city limits of Joplin with grant money, which allowed them to move quickly and hold on to that cash that they had and make some decisions with what they did with that.
By 2015, Joplin's population had not only recovered to its previous number, but had surpassed it and was sitting at more than 51,000. By early 2016, JHAP had provided more than $15 million in assistance to home buyers.
And we started to see the trend move back into Joplin once we had some inventory build up, about 1.5 to 2 years after the tornado. And then we've had a strong market really ever since.
Hundreds of residents lost their place to live 10 years ago, but thanks to one area organization, Stephanie Roper and many others like her now have a place to call their own. Here's Stuart Price.
Stephanie Roper always joked that pigs would fly before she had the chance to own her own home. Where would you be without this?
I would probably still be renting in a not so good area, just trying to make it paycheck to paycheck.
But thanks to the Joplin area Habitat for Humanity and some of the companies, churches, individuals, and organizations that support their mission, that changed in 2013.
Oh, I would just say thank you, and that's just not even enough to be able to be a homeowner and to have a house to call my own and do what I want and have a yard. It's just been a blessing 10 times over.
And while most homeowners dread the upkeep that come with that, she doesn't mind it a bit.
I get excited when it's time to mow the yard because I get to keep it the way I want it. And I can like change the flowers and do what I want. So no, it's awesome.
And when something inside or out needs some TLC, she knows just where to go.
I go to the Restore quite often whenever I need something. I always go first there to see if they've got it, you know, before I go anywhere else. But they also, Habitat has some wonderful programs to help homeowners. I mean, not just Habitat owners, but just they're very involved with their community.
Yeah, Stephanie's house is one of 46 homes of the 107 we built after the tornado that was funded by our church or a faith-based organization.
And if you think it's rewarding to be the recipient of a Habitat home, just imagine how good it feels to turn over the keys to a new homeowner, which he's had the chance to do a lot over the last 10 years.
Currently, we have 9 homes under construction, and we have a couple more to get started this year, so we're excited for another good year.
But building homes is just part of the Habitat mission.
Our Restore that's open Monday through Saturday is a great place to find discounted items. Our Brush with Kindness is light exterior repairs for homeowners in need, and also a critical home repair, which we've been doing for a couple years now, where we do more major rehab. So we encourage you to contact us and find out more about our programs.
In Joplin, Stuart Price, KSN Local News.
For most Joplin tornado victims, losing everything is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. But for one man in particular, it's not the first time it's happened. We learn his incredible story from Stuart Price.
Tang Dat Nguyen was one of 7 residents selected by the ABC show Extreme Home Makeover to receive a new home after the structure he was living in at the time was leveled.
I don't know nothing. I only thank God to give me the house for the rest of my life, you know. Because at this time I get 70 years old. Yeah, right now 80 years old.
But if you think this is the first time he's lost everything, you'd be wrong. In fact, it's not even close to the worst thing that's ever happened to him.
I am very poor. The community took on my property, my land, my car, my money, everything, even the paper, even the picture. They took it all. After 11 years in jail, they released me and I'm broke nothing. Only one pant, one shirt.
Nguyen was a pilot in the Vietnam War. He flew American-made jets for the Vietnamese Air Force. When Saigon fell, he and many other soldiers who fought against the communist regime were jailed, some of which didn't survive the horrifying ordeal.
In the communist jail, very hard labor.
In fact, the prisoners were forced to build their own jail in the Vietnamese jungle. A few years after he was finally released, he immigrated to the U.S. and settled in Joplin in 1995 without any relatives and not much more than the shirt on his back. He got a job at Pillsbury, and many of his co-workers volunteered their time to build his new home.
Surprised, happy, and cry everything, you know, and only I thank God to give me the house for the rest of my life.
Of the 7 homes built by the Extreme Home Makeover team, only one other original family still lives in them. In Joplin, Stuart Price, KSN Local News.
Of course, Joplin wasn't the only town affected by the storm. Coming up after the break, we take a look at Duquesne, the little town who could make an impressive comeback.
And Joplin schools took a huge hit by the tornado that night, demolishing Joplin High School. We'll take a look at the investment Joplin made with their children's futures.
While Joplin bore the brunt of Mother Nature's wrath on May 22nd of 2011, it wasn't the only community devastated by that storm. The city of Duquesne was deeply impacted as well. We learn what the townspeople went through from Stuart Price.
Much like parts of Joplin, it's hard to tell there was an EF5 tornado that ripped through the community of Duquesne 10 years ago. But former Mayor Denny White says looks can be deceiving.
And I lived in 10th of Duquesne. I was lucky. It missed me. But it just tore this town apart and Joplin and everything. It was unbelievable, the things you'd see that night. Homes just gone, people trapped in homes, everything. It was a mess.
White can't say enough about the will of the people who make up this resilient community.
It wasn't about 2 days. I was up there working at my business, and I heard this hammers rebuilding already. And it went on for months, years even. And the people out here, I guarantee you, they were tough. They stayed with it and they rebuilt homes.
While residents that survive a disaster often look towards their government for strength and fortitude, White says for him, it was just the opposite.
It was a pleasure to be a mayor here, and I was sorry I had to be a part of the tornado, but it changed my life.
Even though he wasn't formally invited, he said he and the city's clerk went to a meeting between FEMA and the city of Joplin the very next day.
I stood up, I said, I'm the mayor of Duquesne, Missouri, and I said, it came right to us too. And you know, within 2 hours, they were out here starting paperwork on everything, so I couldn't complain. We had volunteers. It was the best thing you could ever ask for. We had a food deal set up here under the carport. We fed anybody. We had a grocery deal in here, and we had clothing. We gave away everything.
While some people in southwest Missouri aren't quick to ask for help under any circumstance, he's glad he did. And as far as he's concerned, the federal government listened.
And there's a lot of paperwork when you deal with FEMA, but they've been really good to Duquesne. We've got a lot of money off of them for here, and we needed it. You know, there's no question about that. But I'll never forget it if I live to be 100. I'm getting closer all the time, too.
In Duquesne, Stuart Price, KSN Local News.
The impact of the 2011 tornado was far-reaching, especially with Joplin education. And nowhere was that more evident than at Joplin High School. Gretchen Bolander shows us the transformation of the campus in her report, Where Hope Lives. Now, we have to warn you, some of these images may be disturbing for some viewers.
It's just kind of like one of those scenes that, you know, that's the first scene you see in a war movie or something.
Then Joplin High School Superintendent Dr. Carrie Saketa remembers first thinking there might be a little roof damage. It didn't take long to find out he was way off.
The high school didn't look as bad as it really was when I first saw it, and noticed how the gym was imploded, and I couldn't believe it.
The first one on campus after the tornado, he started walking around surveying the damage.
I was disoriented. I couldn't tell that Franklin Tech was what it was.
It wasn't just JHS. 10 Joplin school buildings were damaged or destroyed.
All these schools were in a line, basically. You know, unfortunately, nobody thought about that. I think it was close to 4,000 or a little over 4,000 of our students had lost their school.
With the goal of starting the fall semester on time, the first challenge was figuring out where they could hold classes.
Of course, my mind went to just some big empty warehouse with plywood, you know, like little 6-foot walls or something between classrooms.
Buildings throughout Joplin were transformed. Everything from an industrial spec building and a former warehouse to the old Shopco building at North Park Mall.
It was interesting when you told people you had a campus in a mall. That always raised eyes and got attention.
At least for juniors and seniors. Space limitations meant freshmen and sophomores were across town at the old Memorial Middle School. Across the street, large school events were staged at Memorial Hall. And Franklin Tech moved downtown. Architects and construction crews worked around the clock to get ready for the start of class.
I can remember people wanting to come in and get tours.
Really what I would call a top-notch environment. And there's some days I still miss that place. I mean, I really enjoyed it out there.
At the same time, planning was underway for a permanent home. Joplin's mining past created a few problems.
Because all of Joplin's undermined, and so, of course, we ran into that.
At nearly 500,000 square feet under one roof, the construction timeline would take time.
I would sit there days just like, you know, you're saying, thinking, I can't believe this is going to be our school. You know, I mean, it's 3.5 blocks long.
The idea was to create a home for 21st century education.
You build a high school for hopefully 50, 60, 70 years.
And not just classrooms. The Eagles got new football practice facilities, 3 gymnasiums, and fields for baseball, softball, soccer, and tennis.
The athletic facilities are top-notch.
Zucchetta also points to the performing arts space, Eagle Alley, and a technology center like no other. With a long list of features, he says it's hard to pick a favorite.
It is the old school. I really like it. I guess I'm a little biased.
When he looks back at the process, Zucchetta says support from the community was crucial the entire transition period, but especially the first home football game after the storm.
We had about 7,000 to 8,000 people there, and it was really a night to celebrate that, you know, this thing isn't going to keep us down. And I think that was a night I'll never forget.
Reporting in Joplin, I'm Gretchen Bolander.
And that's not all we have on Joplin schools. Coming up after the break, we hear how the district is now providing a 21st century education.
And I had the chance to speak with Mark Norton, the father of Will Norton, the Joplin senior who lost his life on May 22nd, 2011. We had a chance to speak about Will's legacy 10 years later.
And how about all those beautiful murals, sculptures, and landmarks dedicated to the 161 people who lost their lives that fateful night? We'll check in on them and see how they're being preserved 10 years later after the break. Stay with us.
Of all the buildings that were destroyed that night, perhaps the Mercy Hospital building was the most critical. Hundreds of lives impacted by just that one building, with hundreds of stories. 10 years later, here's a look at 3 people who have never been the same since.
Everybody took cover, and, you know, we were there for what seemed like an eternity. And everybody did the best we could, you know, and then we hit the middle of it, and there was that moment where we all thought we were done, and then the second part of it hit, and we knew that it was even worse than the first part. There's moments. Am I going home? Was this morning the last time I saw my family?
In the closet, all I could think about was my family, but the minute we stepped out of that area, it was like go to work mode.
I got a text message from the hospital saying the hospital had been hit. And, you know, I told my husband, I said, you know, I got to go. I got out of the truck and I said, I'll talk to you later. And I didn't realize it would be another 27 hours before I went back.
And even the ones that could walk didn't have shoes on, and the glass and the debris everywhere was an obstacle because we couldn't ask them to walk on the glass, but we couldn't find any belongings. Yep. So we just were wrapping towels around their feet to try to get them to walk.
They were afraid that the hospital was going to explode, and so I remember running down 26th Street, and all at once, everything, the sound just closed for whatever reason. And I remember thinking, I'm too close. And this thing goes, and I'm a statistic. And all at the time that I could think about was that my mom would have to hear it.
North side of you can look out the window and just see the path of destruction, and my heart sunk because I knew that we needed to help our people, but we also knew that there was people that were really in bad shape out there.
The hospital is a beacon of hope and health. So everybody who was hurt in the community, the first thing they do is, we've got to get to the hospital. But they didn't know the hospital had been hit too.
You know, we were helping bring people in on desk chairs, on doors, and just, you know, trying to just get people in. And obviously, Memorial Hall was overwhelmed pretty quickly, and so then they opened up McCauley.
Getting home at 3 a.m., you know, all my kids were asleep, but that was the first thing that I did, is just stood in the doorway and, you know, had that moment of reflection that I did get to see them again, and there were going to be people who weren't going to get to see their family. You know, you feel sorry for them. But over the 10 years, as you look back and you reflect, and as I've learned more and more about, you know, the sisters and realizing the stuff they go through and have went through, it gives you that sense of the resiliency, and you realize that people in general, and even the people who live here in this community that have been through this, there's always a way.
So many people come into this life, leave this life. You know, you go through some of your best of times and worst of times in a hospital. And doing it at St. John's at Mercy was special. And so I love the fact that they've kept the monuments and the statue and the care that they took to preserve what was here and all of the lives that have come and gone over the years on this ground.
When the night was still, in the middle of a pitch black abyss, a beacon of light rose above the darkness. With one hospital incapacitated by one of the deadliest tornadoes ever, another did everything it could just to stay functioning. Now, the lines were blurred. Doctors, nurses, and staff coming from both hospitals in one facility, while hundreds of injured people lined the hallways. This is the May 22nd, 2011 story of Freeman Health System.
When I walked in, it was unlike anything I have ever seen before.
You prepare for it, but you always think you're preparing for something that most likely will never happen.
Many of the medical staff to respond that fateful night knew this was going to be different.
And I remember so vividly my wife saying,
"This is going to be really bad, isn't it?"
I said, "Well, we're going to probably be here for a while."
As far as you could see, there was people in every direction crushing their way in, trying to get in.
There were people everywhere. I mean, in the front lobby, spilling out into the outside, into the parking lot and the driveways and so forth.
Within about 15 minutes, we had 100 patients show up. And that tells you a great deal. When you have, one patient showing up every 45 seconds, that's something you can't understand until you see it.
We did 22 life-saving surgeries within the first 12 hours. We had to access blood. We had to get all the patients triaged that were coming to the hospital. We had over 1,500 people in our hospital that night.
It was shoulder to shoulder people everywhere.
Everyone, and they mean everyone, got right to work.
We set up mobile surgery centers. We set up mobile triage areas. It was all about getting our team together and doing what they do best.
There was emotional support being provided. There were people doing jobs that in any other circumstance they would not have been doing.
That includes Renee herself, helping her team care for even seriously injured patients in a makeshift room set up inside Freeman Health System.
And asked the incident commander, I said, I think if I could take about 4 or 5 of my medical nurses with me, we could open up an area down in the conference rooms and begin taking care of patients.
The hospital's now president and CEO found herself in the temporary morgue, holding the hands of those who were dying.
I didn't want them to die without some comfort and without a human touch. And so to sit there and hold their hand and give them, I hope, that comfort and that reassurance that someone was there with them.
But ask any of them and they'll tell you what they remember most that night.
There were some very horrific injuries and some that weren't as bad, but people were surprisingly pretty quiet.
It was quiet, eerily quiet. There wasn't people screaming, people yelling, people, they were just in a state of shock.
We probably at one time had about 70 people in the conference rooms, 40 of which were patients, and it was as quiet as it is in this room right now.
Step outside and you might have heard the hum of the hospital's generators instead. The director of facilities and his team made sure the hospital stayed running in the night.
That night it was so dark in Joplin because electricity was out in this whole end of town. But we glowed in the night from our generator power.
I remember being up on the tower and looking out over the entire city of Joplin, and it was completely black. But yet here Freeman was lit.
When we were glowing through that dark, dark night, we knew that that was a beacon of hope for people. We knew they'd see the light of Freeman and know that we're here for them and we're going to be here with them throughout the duration of this catastrophe.
And many individuals were also beacons of hope. One of them, Aaron Brown, the lead pastor at St. Paul's United Methodist Church. His story next. St. Paul's United Methodist Church was one of close to 30 churches that were either damaged or destroyed 10 years ago. 2 of its members died. 99 families were without homes. Its lead pastor for the past 26 years is Aaron Brown, a man whose faith and leadership helped heal a community.
Yeah, this survived, and it was turned to this page. Oh my gosh. And the passage of Scripture is for everything. There's a season, a time for every matter under heaven.
The Bible at St. Paul's United Methodist Church hasn't been touched much over the past 10 years, nor has another relic that also survived the storm, this cross.
How many times do I think about the tornado? Probably every day.
Aaron Brown was one of the key figures in the healing and recovery process. Along with his work from the pulpit, he was also part of Rebuild Joplin and spent countless hours counseling hundreds and hundreds of survivors.
I think those are the moments when you see, you know, can you practice what you preach? And having been here for, at that point, 16 years as a pastor, realizing, okay, I've built a lot of trust over 16 years, and now's the time I have to utilize that trust to rally people in a direction of healing and hope and rebuilding not only our church, but our community.
His rally work went into effect immediately after the tornado, and it involved a hammer that night in the middle of the street.
And so I found this hammer, and I'm like, I'm taking it because I know that I'm going to need to dig somebody out. And like, the only thing I got is this hammer. So I carried it around with me all night long, just ready to use it whenever it was needed. I call it my yellow-handled faith hammer. You know, when it comes to my faith, what I realized, I don't know if it was weeks or months later, that the whole tornado experience and the losses that we had, it made me understand God less, but trust God more. I saw how faith mobilized the entire country to show up here and say, what can we do to help? And people loving us without even knowing us. So I saw faith in action in ways that I never thought would ever see or have to see.
Brown attributes his strength in the process in part to one basic trait: responsibility.
Everything we have is a gift to be used in servanthood. So having been here in leadership for so long, I knew that that was a gift that I had to be a good steward of. And if one way I could be a good steward of that was to just be visible and speak and rally people local and rally people nationally, if I could do that, that's what I was supposed to do. So I tried to do that as much as I could.
That included an 800-plus mile bike ride from Joplin to New Orleans in 2013, part of JOMO Adventures, which raised more than $155,000 to rebuild homes and lives of natural disasters. That was 2 years after our natural disaster, when, even then, Brown had and saw hope.
I think the moment that I thought it was going to be okay was the moment I saw people streaming in from all over. And I knew we weren't alone. And I thought it's going to be okay.
The 2011 tornado flattened houses, tore through businesses, and tossed around countless cars and trees. And then there were the churches, 24 in the path of the storm. Gretchen Bolander takes us back to the impact at St. Mary's Catholic Church, school, and the cross that still stands today.
We kind of heard through the grapevine that the school and the church, you know, had really taken a hit. But when we walked up there and saw the total devastation.
That on top of tornado damage to Margie Black's own home.
Was very overwhelming.
She was one of many St. Mary's members who lost their church home.
So overwhelming to see the destruction.
Decades of Sunday masses, prayer vigils, and choir practice reduced to piles of rubble. Patty Wheeler says it was a tough thing to see while remembering her daughter's wedding and dropping off grandkids for school.
Just the things that we did as a parish family, at that moment walking through and just seeing that debris kind of put a thought in your head as, will it ever come back together again?
It was a beginning, starting with cleaning up the wreckage of the church and school, something they didn't have to do on their own.
I think the greatest blessing that came out of the tornado was the number of people from all around the world that came to help.
The site at 25th and Moffett was one of more than 24 churches damaged or destroyed by the storm.
At that time, I really thought we would rebuild there.
But many changes were in store. The church address would move to 32nd and Central City Road. Construction of a new campus wouldn't wrap up for more than 3 years.
As we saw other churches beginning to open up, it was like, well, why not us, you know? But I'm glad we took the time to do the research and build this beautiful, beautiful church that we have now.
And Patty points out that what's even more important is still intact 10 years later.
What makes that building is the people that are inside of it. And the majority of those people stayed together. We came back together, and we're still together.
But she still has a piece of wood from the original church that she saved.
I mean, it's like saving something of your mom or your dad's.
For Margie Black, it's a statue of Mary that rode out the storm.
It was maybe a moment of hope, something that gave me some grace in spite of all this brokenness, that to find this statue completely intact, it's very special to us.
Reporting in Joplin, I'm Gretchen Bolander.
It has been an emotional hour, delving back into one of our nation's most deadly tornadoes.
But for some of us, remembering is what keeps the memory of those we lost alive.
Coming up, we reflect on how the landscape has changed, but more importantly, how far we've come.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now, we understand that for many of you, this is a very difficult day.
And we want to say a very special thank you to all of you who let us interview you for our stories on this very sensitive topic.
We, like you, are a part of this community. Our hearts still hurt for the ones we lost, and our deepest, sincerest condolences go out to many of you who are trying to navigate through this very difficult time of year. As we leave you tonight, a look back at the recovery of Joplin, Missouri.